Hello. I am laughing at myself both because I'm the the irony, if you will, of talking about patience at a time when I'm feeling incredibly impatient with my hair. Hello, welcome to those of you who are joining. And I'm also laughing because I tried to go live and then realized that my headphones were plugged in. And then I had to, anyway, I just so I'm just laughing about um, wanting to talk about patience when, anyway, this is sort of the state of the moment that I happen to be in. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Beautiful to see your little faces and your names pop up. And as always, if you're watching live, I really love the live engagement. So I'm always a big, so meta, thank you. I was trying to teach my kids, this is total tangent, I was trying to teach my kids the meaning of the word meta this morning. It did not go well. Anyway, if you're here live, I really love the live engagement. So any comments, shares, questions that you have, I really welcome. And of course, if you're watching the replay, I love just getting to see like, hi, I was here. And I also love that dialogue, but I need a little bit more context when I get the replay comments because it's not live. So I don't always know what I'm talking about when you write your comment. So, oh, thank you. God, I'm like, thank you, Emma. So here we go. What do I want to say here? So this idea of what nature, and there's both what I really believe nature has to teach us, and then ultimately I want to just keep dropping in this underlying piece that I think it's so easy sometimes to use nature as a teacher and be like, okay, cool, got the lesson. And that it is actually that experience often of being in nature that drops it into our being and our body. That these lessons that nature has to offer us, they're not typically things, they are things that we can get on a mental level, but there are things that often are so helpful to get even deeper than on the mental level, like to have an experience of. So most of you, and it's a little ironic, if you will, to make an invitation to be in nature while on a Facebook Live. I have had people watch my Facebook Lives like while they're gardening, and that's awesome, but that's rare. It's rare that somebody will do that somebody can do that. So it's a little bit ironic to make that invitation, but my invitation is really to take these and then ultimately to find a way to go be in nature and see how she can actually speak to you, or where can you find these in that actual experience. And I'll say this later as well, but in some way I'm making that invitation also as an invitation to join me in May up on land near Mount Shasta, which is in Northern California, if you're a woman. So all you men, you're up, like, stay with us here on this live. There's a lot of, like, this is good. Take yourself into nature. Go be in nature with a friend. Find another teacher in nature. But if you're a woman, I 100% invite you to come join me in May on this incredible land where a lot of what I'm going to talk about is actually like, this is where this came to me, is on this land up near Mount Shasta. So a huge piece that nature just keeps teaching me over and over and over again is this idea of patience. And that, I don't know if this is just humans in general. It's so easy to say like, this is the human condition, or the times we live in, And in some way, I don't know if it matters why this is. But it is my experience that to be human in this day and age is to feel hurried. And of course, that's not 100% of the time, or like 100% of humans 100% of the time. It is so often my experience. And it is so often the experience of the other humans I know, is that there's some feeling of urgency. And that can show up both in the sense of, hurry up, we've got somewhere to be, like, come on, hurry up, like a very in the moment urgency. Or it can show up like, there's something I need to do with my life before I die. What is my purpose? It can show up so many different ways. And I kind of give those examples both in the sense that it's kind of easy to see the fallacy of the part that says like there's somewhere else I need to be rather than right here. But it can often be a little more challenging to really see the fallacy in like there's something I need to do with my life that isn't this moment, or that isn't like somehow I need to do it faster than it's happening. And what I believe is so beautiful about the way that nature teaches this, and about my experience of this, is that nature is neither urgent, right? Like trying to be faster than she is, but neither is nature lazy. So it's not so much falling to one side or the other, but really the sense of a steady pace and a trust that the continuation, like that there's some trust that if I keep breathing and I keep moving and not frantic, always moving, but if I really keep putting one foot in front of the other and taking the next step, and I keep breathing and I keep stepping into what's next, that I truly will fulfill in my life, that there is no way to not do that. Nature says if I am a rock that mostly sits in one place, or if I am a tree that doesn't get to walk around but continues to grow, or if I'm a squirrel that runs around and hides acorns, if I'm a river that is sometimes rushing and sometimes very slow, or a tiny trickle, that I am still fulfilling my path. Like nature shows us this. Nature shows us that there is a real, there's a deep wisdom in being patient. And that includes being patient with the impatient parts of ourselves. So there is there's a bridge here in terms of being patient, and then being patient with being the being that you are. So to me, this also bridges into, what does nature have to teach us about relationships? What does nature have to teach us about relationship? And to me, that again becomes this real dance. And this is why at the beginning I really make this invitation, go actually be in nature. If you can't go be in nature in this moment, because you're here watching me, but go be in nature and really ask the question, like, what can I see about how all of this is in relationship, in some form of dynamic relationship? Because what nature really shows us about being in relationship is that it is this thing of be the one that you are, right? The oak tree, as far as I know, anyway, isn't looking over at the redwood or the willow tree and saying like, gosh, if only I was a redwood or a willow tree, like then I would have a better offering for the world, because the oak tree, it just is the offering that it is for the world, while the redwood tree and while the mountain and and then at all the phases too, right? That the acorn isn't hurrying along to become the oak tree, it just is becoming that at all the different phases, but all the different pieces of nature are being, and at the same time, they are in relationship. And so it's not like, I'm going to be me and like, to heck with everyone else. That there's an ecosystem. There really is an ecosystem. And so what is it to be in relationship in nature? And many of you have probably seen, if you haven't, I'll try to describe it, but there's this way that trees will grow. So maybe you've seen this in actual trees, right? Where trees grow around each other. They sort of lean in, and there's actually on this land that I was talking about that's up near Mount Shasta, which is where I have been bringing people now for over a decade. And in May, I'll bring a group of women, but there are these two trees that intertwine. And I remember my teacher up on that land, Tim Corcoran, bringing us to these two trees and just having us sit and be with them. What is it to witness the way that these two trees have grown around each other, have leaned on each other, have maybe not grown quite as big here, but grown bigger here? Like, how have they supported each other? What is the compromise of being connected in this way? So what does nature have to teach us about this relationship? And the same way, if it's not two trees, that often we get to see these places where a tree is in relationship with a fence or some other more human created piece and grows around it. But it's not that neither one doesn't get to exist. They exist together and they change each other. And I think there's this beautiful wisdom in nature that says, I'm not separate, but neither do I cease to be me because of what else there is here. How do we shift and grow around each other because of who I am and because of who you are? And what are the ways that we consciously and unconsciously do slightly shift and navigate differently, but find a different kind of beauty because of who I am and because of who you are? And then what is the ecosystem, right? What does nature tell us about an ecosystem where one thing arises and another, if a large tree grows and there's a lot of shade, maybe something else doesn't grow in the shade, but something else does grow in the shade, that there is this ecosystem. And so there is this deep value in a lot of ways, like on this particular live, I was trying to think if there's a better word for it, but a lot of what I have are questions, right? Rather than the answers to those questions. And again, for me, that is a lot of what nature teaches me, is that there's this value in actually going and being in nature and sitting with the question, right? Being in the space and starting to ask the question, what does this space have to teach me about patience? What does this space have to teach me about relationship? What is in relationship to each other in this space? And what can I learn by being patient and actually allowing that to come to me, rather than the idea of like, okay, I'm gonna like get some information and then go implement it so I can live my purpose faster. But actually, what is it to be in that space and really see at the pace of nature what there is to receive, and then what it actually means to live in that way. And this is one of the things about growth that I have really seen in nature. It's one of my ongoing questions, both about my own personal growth It's one of the things that has taught me so much in terms of how I be with the people who come into my work and be with their own growth. And it's one of the things that I sit with on an ongoing and consistent, if not daily, but a very consistent basis, is this question: what would nature do in the realm of growth? And so often, this links us back to this piece of patience, but I saw it. I had the pleasure of sitting with a woman this morning on Zoom, so not in the same room, but I got to be with her. And one of the things that came up for her was her own impatience with her self-judgment. Her own impatience first with herself. There was a piece that was coming up, and then what came up in response was, oh, it's that again. Like, I'm still working on this after all these years. And so again, there's this thing like, what would nature do? Would nature judge herself? Like, God, I still have these fucking seasons and they're like the same after all these years. I don't think so. I don't claim to know what nature thinks or if she thinks, but I don't believe that the broadest sense of nature or the different pieces in nature, right? I don't believe that the tree is impatient with the cycle of growth. I don't really believe that any part is really impatient with that. And so this sense of my own growth and where there is to learn and grow, where there is to get to, some other place to get to, and also in the realm of life purpose or business or scaling. I remember when the very first time that that question came into my awareness, right? What would nature do? And it was so clear. It was like, nature doesn't scale, not in the way that we talk about as humans. And especially in our current sort of cultural phenomenon, and especially in the realm of personal growth, like the coaching world and in entrepreneurship in general. Really this idea that there's so much pressure to scale. How is that scalable? How can I and for me, so this isn't for everyone, and I don't even mean it as a judgment. Like, if that's your jam and that lights you up and that creates more aliveness, like, go on with your bad self. But I also want to create space for me. And for those of you who this is also some exhalation and some sense of relief, that it's also okay to say that's not my jam. And when I look out at nature, mostly my response to that question is nature doesn't scale. That nature doesn't see the need to create value without being there, right? Like, so much of the time that's the scalability. Like, how do I keep offering my work but without me needing to be there? And there is a beauty in that, because I also see that nature doesn't have an egoic need to be involved. So one beautiful intention I would see underneath that is like, oh, where does this propagate? Where does this propagate without my egoic need to be involved? But also, where is it an egoic need to scale beyond my natural scope? So the cool thing is that also then links to this piece. Part of where this really came to me in this desire to have this inquiry was that I was listening to the teacher, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And many of you may know her from the book that she wrote, Women Who Run with the Wolves. Like sort of a seminal piece of work, especially in the realm of women's work. But she's gone on, in my opinion, I still think that book is like, the bee's knees, but in my opinion, she's gone on to do work that is even more amazing since then. And a lot of it is in speaking and audio books. And so I was listening to an audiobook, and she was talking about the rhizome. And the rhizome in a plant is this piece of a plant that even when we try to pull it up, it still exists underground. And it both lives in the fallow, like we might try to pull it up, or the plant itself might sort of fall over and die in the fall and in the winter months. But underneath, the rhizome is just waiting patiently until the conditions are just right. And the sun comes, or the water comes, or the soil thaws. And the rhizome can sort of spark again. I don't even want to say come to life, because the rhizome is always alive in that time. It's just fallow, right? It's a different season. And one of the things the rhizome does is that part, it's almost like a root that's been living underground that can then rise again. So asparagus is like this. I'm gonna switch over in a moment and actually read both the definition of a rhizome and then also some of the plants, because it was really cool when I was going to research this to be able to talk about it. But that is the part of us that is always alive. And I believe until, well, I don't even know what happens at death, so I'm not going to go there. But I believe that that is true for every human. It does not matter what you have or have not done in life. It does not matter whether you believe that you have accomplished what you should. It does not matter what has happened to you in life. That there is, I believe this. If you are watching this, or, that is a part of every human. It doesn't matter whether you're in a very alive and creative, connected part of life, or you're in a time that you might call dark and fallow. It doesn't matter whether that's just a seasonal piece, right, in terms of the ebb and flow of life, or this is, has been for a long time. It doesn't matter. This part exists in you. And I am willing to be the one that holds that, even if you don't believe it. If you don't believe it, if you don't believe me saying it, that's okay. That is okay. But I will hold that inside you there is that rhizome that is still alive, and that is truly just waiting to be awakened by the right conditions and the right circumstances, the right light to meet that, the right water to meet that, so that the next iteration can grow, so that it can bloom again, so that it can awaken again and become the next thing that it's truly meant to become. And the interesting piece of that, the way that that connects to this idea of nature doesn't scale or growth, is that there are many, many plants that in an ecosystem we might call invasive plants. They're the ones with the rhizomes. And so this is kind of this trippy little bridge, which is they're invasive grasses, they're invasive plants. And so there's actually all these pieces of like, well, how do we actually get rid of this rhizome? But I think inside of us, it's really useful to look at what the truth of what that is. So there's the rhizome that's just waiting to sprout again. But also the other thing that it does is it puts off shoots underground. It doesn't just rise again from where it was. It actually grows horizontally so that it can put off shoots all along the rhizome. And that's kind of the extraordinary mechanism of this thing called rhizome. So to me, this is the link between all of this. What does nature teach us about relationships, growth, patience, and practicing in the fallow times? So I love that. So Karen just said the right conditions. Thank you for reminding me about the waiting and the pause. I think just to touch back in on that, because you said that, Karen, it's useful to remember that there's different perspectives of how to look at what are those right conditions. And one is the reminder that sometimes we truly are not putting ourselves in the right conditions, and that it is really important to look around and go, oh, like I'm beating myself up for what, like why are things not working for me? Why can I not move forward? Why can I, like, there's sort of the sense it's like, oh, I am truly not, I have not yet put myself in the right conditions. And actually, I have some control over that. I can actually, I remember somebody, I can't remember how this came, but it was like, you're not a tree. You can get up and walk away. You know, trees have their own ways of doing this, and rocks have their own way of doing this, and water has its own way of doing this. But as humans, we have this particular capacity to like get up from the conditions that we're in and change them. And whether that means truly, like, you know, literally moving and maybe not living in the place that we're in, or not staying in the same friend group or the same relationship, or like, you know, actually getting up and moving, or maybe not sitting in the same room, but like getting outside in nature, right? We have this capacity to get up and move, but we also have the capacity to change our circumstances while we stay in them. And then the other perspective of that is that sometimes it truly is, like you're pointing to, Karen, it's the willingness to be patient and allow for our circumstances to change, like allow for the sunlight to shift, allow for the water to come. Sometimes that actually takes stillness. And I would say that, again, simultaneously, it's the importance of connecting into ourselves and going like, which is it? Is this one of those moments for me to take responsibility for changing my circumstances so that my little rhizome can come to life again? Or is this one of those moments where stillness and patience is truly what's called for? So sometimes it's really dropping in to our own selves and answering that honestly for our own selves. And sometimes also it's that willingness to ask those people closest to us for their reflection, because they may see us more clearly than we can see ourselves. And they may be finally the ones to be able to say, like, girl, you know, or man, or whoever, you know, like whatever, like, hey, bro, you have been complaining about these circumstances for a year now, and it is time to change them. Or to say, like, no, this is a time to sit still in your life and allow for the rain and the sun to come. And sometimes it truly is the external perspective. You know, again, sometimes it's a therapist or a coach or a community of peers or a friend, or, you know, those people closest to us. And sometimes it is truly dropping into our own inner knowing and going, no, actually, I already know this to be true. I just wasn't willing to admit it. So thanks for that comment. And the reminder about the different ways inside of our own rhizome. So I started this out with, yes, these are lessons that nature teaches us, but the reason I actually titled this live, What Being in Nature Can Teach Us, is because, again, it really is, there's something about putting ourselves in as deep of a nature as we can. You know, for some of us, that's a backyard, or that's a park, or that's the beach, or that's, you know, maybe we can actually drive 30 minutes and then hike an hour. Like, how far out can we get with ease in our life? But being willing to push ourselves beyond that and actually sit in that space that nature gives us. Because often it's in that space that we truly see the truth of these teachings, that if we go out, and we don't just go out in the springtime when things are blooming, but we go out in the winter time. Right now in the northern hemisphere, at least where I am, but pretty much in the northern hemisphere, like we're in winter. That's just like the tiniest little edges of spring are showing. And right now, like where I am, we've been in a lot of cold and wet and flooding and darkness and grayness, and the willingness to actually go out and see that this is also life. And so that's the, oh, hi, Wendy. That is the teaching of the rhizome, and it's the teaching of the patience to go out, not just like, yeah, nature looks like, or the fall time, right, which is abundance, or the summer, which is warmth, but it's like nature is blooming, and nature is, that all the fruit and the abundant harvest, but like, oh no, it's still alive when things are dark and things are cold. And so you can hear my voice tell you this, that inside each of you, there is this rhizome. There is something alive, always, always, always. And you can also go out and actually sit in nature and really let her teach you this. Sit in the space where things are mostly, they look dead. Sit in the space where most of the trees have already lost their leaves and been barren for months. Sit in, but maybe where you go, there's also teeny tiny green shoots. And then that's that reminder, like the rhizomes of those grasses, they waited underground for months. And I guarantee for those grasses, that felt like forever. And that they don't just do that once. It's not like, oh, I was patient once, so nature rewarded me and now I get to grow. It's like, oh no, that's going to happen again and again and again. So really this piece of nature teaching us patience, and these fallow times teaching us that is that not only is life still present and available in the fallow times, in the dark times, in the winter times, but that those times are actually essential. And how can we truly honor those in our own life? And that's part of this piece around, what does nature teach us about growth? Nature teaches us that these times are essential for our own growth. That the dying and the letting go and the sitting in fallow, dark times are as essential as the growing times, as the blooming times, as the harvest times. So I wanted to read this definition of rhizome because I just thought this was such a beautiful metaphor. So the definition of a rhizome, to start, is a continuously growing horizontal underground stem which puts out lateral shoots and advantageous roots at intervals. Okay, I have to say this again because this is just fucking cool. A continuously growing horizontal underground stem which puts out lateral shoots and advantageous roots at intervals. Okay, because I want to pause there. I have to look at it while I say this. So this is what I was speaking to. It's the reminder that within you, the continuously growing, even when it doesn't feel like, right? The rhizome is there, even when the plant above looks like it's dead. The plant falls over, the plant gets brown and dies, the plant gets cut down, even sometimes when someone tries to pull it out. That rhizome, this is the thing about the rhizome actually is still there. It's one of the things that people who do work with like non-native plants and trying to, it's like the bane of their existence, is that it's so hard actually to get the rhizome out. But I'm going to focus on, for us, like, no, that is how hardy you are. Again, no matter what's happened to you, no matter the circumstances of your life, like no matter, there is this continuously growing horizontal underground, right? Can't be seen. It's growing even when it can't be seen, that puts out lateral shoots at advantageous times, in advantageous intervals. So I believe that this is the willingness, even the willingness to remember that we have that allows us, right? We're less likely to remember to like, I'm going to put out a little connection here, or like, well, what happens if I do this? In a way, this is like this live. Like half the time, I don't even know if what I'm talking about makes sense, but this is partly me putting out like advantageous roots at advantageous intervals. Like here's a thing, and then maybe it grows and maybe it doesn't. But if we keep putting out the roots at advantageous intervals, some of them will grow, guaranteed. And then I wanted to read, and it's really important, this piece around that it's underground. It's continuously growing and it's underground, which means that it often cannot be seen. And it really is true. I've done enough gardening and I've spent like a lot of time in nature that it is true. These pieces that you have no idea they're there. Here I'm going to see, because I know that asparagus is one of them. So then a question is, what is the function of the rhizome? Oh no. What are two examples? But actually they gave a lot. So asparagus is one. And if you don't know, if you have a plot of ground where asparagus grows, when it's not asparagusing, it looks like nothing. Like it looks like there's nothing there. And then there's this cool, but that it actually, the way that asparagus grows is like that it puts out these shoots, and then you're not supposed to harvest it actually for several seasons, because when you first plant it, it just puts out like one, there's only one asparagus. It's not like tomatoes where you plant one tomato plant and then maybe you get like, several dozen tomatoes. Like an asparagus is literally it's just one shoot. And if you break it off and eat it, that's it for that asparagus for that year. But then it will grow. They grow into these incredibly beautiful, like they're ferns, actually. They're a frondy plant. I remember the first time I had heard this, but the first time I really saw it growing, and they'll be like 6 feet, 7 feet sometimes tall. They're these beautiful, like sort of frondy tall plants. And then they have these flowers that are just exquisite. And then they actually help each other grow. If you let them grow into their frondiness and they do some sort of pollination that I don't totally understand. But also underground, then there's that rhizome. And so if you let them go and do their thing, then they also will grow out here. And next year there's like, these other shoots. And so you're supposed to just really let them do their cycle for several cycles before you ever start harvesting any of the asparagus. And if you will truly let it do that, then you'll have like an amazing plot of asparagus. But if you start harvesting too early, it takes it a lot longer to grow. So there's a really great analogy in here that it's not fully formed for me yet, but I hope in listening that you can hear that as well. Like where there's something about letting ourselves have like almost in a way the bursts of that could be harvested, and the willingness to actually let those be what they are. Trust that the rhizome will stay alive underneath. Let them grow into some sort of like unwieldy, frondy thing, and go through the cycles. Like go through the cycles and not be like, oh shit, I didn't harvest soon enough and now I'm in a fallow period again. But no, because the rhizome is there. That means the next cycle is going to be more productive. But no, it's not even just the second cycle. It's like letting them go through 3, 4 cycles before you start harvesting some of the asparagus. But this is what I loved when it was asking about examples, because a lot of the ones that I know are what are called invasive species in the area where I live. But these ones, hops, super cool that hops has rhizomes. I don't know, I love that. I think because then there's this fermentation process, which is like its own whole thing. Asparagus is just super cool, the way that asparagus grows. Ginger, which is so, what I loved about ginger being on the, ginger, turmeric, and galangal, which is another, I don't know enough about it to truly speak to it, but these are these deeply, deeply medicinal plants that ultimately we harvest part of the root, but it doesn't mean that they can't be over harvested, but one of the reasons that we can even harvest the medicine of these roots is because ultimately they're rhizomes in nature. And so, we have to be careful to not go down and dig up just the whole thing and not let it keep putting off the roots, at advantageous intervals, like I was saying, but we just go like, oh no, this is the medicine that I need to harvest now, and then let it kind of die back. And ginger, of course, above ground, it puts off these extraordinary flowers, which are like beautiful and amazing in their own right. But what we as humans, and possibly other creatures, I don't know, but what we harvest is the root of it, the turmeric or the ginger, and in these small quantities, right? Like we don't need to OD on these. We don't need to over harvest them. Incredibly medicinal, incredibly powerful, right? So they're rhizomes. This is amazing. And then some beautiful ones, irises, lily of the valley, and lotus. And the lotus, of course, this is such a common sort of piece of wisdom, right? The lotus, of course, grows like in the muck, in the mud. But in a way, that's true about most of these, because that's the essence of a rhizome, is that it's underground. So it's always going to be in the dark. It's always going to be in the dirt. Like it's always going to be muddy when you go and find it, or like it's just, it lives in that part. But then again, of course, lily of the valley, iris, and lotus, like the extraordinary beauty and delicacy that comes from the rhizome. And that you watch then the iris, the wild iris or the cultivated iris, both of them, they'll look like they're dead. They'll fall over, but they're not. They're not. And that is true for you as well. That's true for us as humans. That is true for every single one of you. Whether you're in the blooming part and you're feeling just gorgeous like a wild iris, awesome. I celebrate you. The wild iris is one of my favorite plants, partly because I love, especially the wild, I love irises in general because they're just like the most sort of, how ultimately it's almost embarrassing how sensual they are. But then in the wild, you can be out in the middle of nowhere and it's totally uncultivated. And then out of nowhere is like, hello, I'm purple and yellow and delicate, and they're just extraordinary. And then they'll die. So maybe you're in that phase and it's wonderful. But they'll die away to nothing. You can go hiking in those same areas and there'll be nothing. And there's nothing for the majority of the time, actually. There's more time that there's nothing than that there's something showing. But underneath, it's always there. And it is full of life. The iris root, you can even, I have them, so I know this. And actually, this is a great story. I think I'll end with this. So again, if there's any comments or questions or shares about your own life, bring them forward, because I'm going to close here in just a moment. But I have irises, and two things about them. One is I dug them all up in this pot because I was trying to separate them because I got too many. They got like, there was too many for a pot. And I needed to put them in another pot or put them in the ground, or, because they keep growing. This rhizome grows underground. It's not like a seed that sprouts. which are also amazing and magnificent, but truly they will literally grow. The root itself grows underground and creates more of itself. It's amazing. And then even that, I had like too much, and so I sort of just tossed some aside. And I'm like embarrassed to admit this, but I did. I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to keep and deal with, and this part I just kind of tossed it aside, and it is now literally growing. I did nothing with it. I didn't even plant it in the ground. I just tossed it aside, and now it's growing because we got all this water. And then the second piece is that we know this about ginger as well, of course, right? Because the root is like in the store and we see it, and then if you leave it there long enough, like in your shelf, it'll start to sprout. But the iris root is the same. It's like you can have them for a long time. You can keep them. They can even look like they're kind of dried and shriveled, and then you put them in the ground, and they get enough water, and then the sun comes, and then poof, like these beautiful showing of leaves, and then out of nowhere the actual iris flower. And that's true about the ginger, and it's anyway these rhizomes. It's so beautiful. And so again, the analogy of the invasive plants notwithstanding, I also really love, especially for us humans who may have experienced a lot of loss or pain. They may or may not be things that we call trauma in our life, but we may have had people in our lives, whether they were our family or from a very young age, or some way that we had the experience that it seemed like someone was trying to pull us up by our roots. And rather than potting us really, really beautifully, they kept trying to pull us up by our roots. And we kept like not being able to quite take root. That rhizome is, that's for those of us that have that experience most importantly, because this is true about, let's use bamboo as an example, because it is one of those. And there's many grasses that are like this, but that you might go and try to pull up because you're weeding and you think you want to plant something different. But underneath, there are these small pieces of the root. There are these rhizomes of those plants that still exist. And they may grow right back up the next week or the next season, or they may lay dormant for a couple of seasons and then shoot up. But that analogy also holds true for you. It does not matter what has happened to you in your life. It does not matter even if you yourself or someone else has tried to pull you out by your roots. You have this part that is always there, and that it doesn't even need perfect circumstances, but given a little bit of water and a little bit of sun, given just a little bit of space, my iris roots that I didn't even put underground that are shooting up, that just given that have this part of you, this part in all of us is literally aching to grow always. And it is life. Like the rhizome itself, it's not even that it wants to be alive. It is alive. It is always alive. It is life. And so, got a little off track there. But yes, I believe this is part of what nature can teach us. And this is what being in nature has to teach us. That actually when we go into nature, we don't necessarily need to have these things taught to us at an intellectual level, but we see it. We see it all around us. We see how life is there in the fallow times. We see that nature doesn't even have the concept of patience, because there is no impatience. There's simply the speed at which things are happening, and they happen without hurrying, without holding oneself back, without playing small, without leaning into its edge, without any of those things. Nature happens. And all the pieces continue to happen. The trees continue to grow, the soil continues to be made, the plants continue to grow and die, the seasons come, the water moves where it moves, all these pieces. There simply is There's patience without the concept of patience. And there's the relationship between all the pieces. And everything ultimately will find its right relationship, because it cannot help but to find its relationship. And that the fallow times are life also. I think that's the simplest way I'd like to say that, is that it's not like life will come again. It's just the fallow times are life also. And know that that is true for you. So I'm going to go back and take a moment with these comments, because I want to see, but I want to say again that if you are a woman and any of this resonates with you, I really deeply invite you to come join me in May on this piece of land. It's called Headwaters Outdoor School, and we'll spend 4 days learning from nature. There is no, I get lost, I think, when I make this invitation, because I have had no greater teacher in my life. So I don't even know how to say what the invitation is. I'm like, you just have to come. You just have to come, and I promise, I don't even want to say I promise it'll change your life, because it's not like that. I just promise that's the space in which all this happens. In that space, we don't need to get things or learn things or all the blah, 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 blah. This is like the human mind trying to put words to this thing that happens automatically when we're willing to sit in that space, in that quiet, in the space of nature, and really ask these questions, and then listen. And then just listen. So please join me for Return to Source, and I'll post the link in the comments. Judith, I hope I'm saying that right, Judith, said rhizome is fucking cool indeed, and not harvesting too early. Yeah, it's like, it's just the analogy that keeps on giving. And I'm glad you feel it, Amy. I know you would. And Amy, you also said, I am so not rooted, and you are so rooted also, right? At the same time, I can feel both. And then Karen Hook said, I am rooting in, I don't know what ATM is, and being pressured. I need to, I didn't totally follow that. Let's see. Pressure to go here and there. I mean, needing to lean in. Yes, there's both. And that's what I believe actually happens in nature, is like take an acorn or a caterpillar. The acorn has to go underground, and there comes a point, right? There's this thing inside that grows, and literally I saw the coolest thing the other day. This is where I'm gonna, at the moment. Okay, great. I never get these I don't know what these things mean. I'm just not hip like that. I took my kids out to this piece of land that we've been going to for the last 6 years, weekly, sometimes daily, watching it through the seasons. It's right across from where we live, and I'm fucking blessed that we get to go there, because it's so close, and at the same time actually has quite a bit of wildness in it. And we met these older ladies, and they were setting up a scavenger hunt for some schools that were going to come there. And we just had I was so excited to meet them. Anyway, one of them held up this thing, and we were all three of us looked at it, and we were like, what is that? And then we realized part that came up, and then there was this almost like a flowery thing that went like this. We realized that was the acorn bursting, that looked like a flower, and then the part that was going to come up was the sprouting part. And so some pressure comes, at which point it says, there is no staying in the seed. It has to burst. And so it does take pressure. It takes the pressure of, it's both pressure and invitation. It's the pressure of the soil. It's the invitation of the sun. It's, but there is this pressure of the external part of the acorn, and inside something has to give. So I absolutely believe that. And yes, our human construct, we create those things, you know. I say, you know, come to this workshop I'm leading and I will put you in that container and then something will give. And it's both. It's a dance between both. Absolutely. And the same, you know, again, I don't know what it feels like to be a caterpillar that goes into the cocoon, but the caterpillar, in a way, creates the circumstances of pressure so that the next iteration can come. And so, yes, that's the leaning in. We create those circumstances of pressure. So I love that you brought that because it's totally true. So in some way, I think I could probably stay here and talk myself in circles about this all day because I just geek out on this and it's super fun. And for now, I will say thank you. Thank you for joining me for this particular conversation, such as it is, around the inherent teachings of nature, and especially around the rhizome. And if you're here live, I love getting to be here in this virtual space with you live. If you're watching the replay, I hope that you'll also join the conversation. Sending you much love. Ciao for now.